This time around, I really am stumped. What are the odds that they not only predict people asking for a cure to an illness, which in this case can be the pandemic, and moments later in the same scene show killer bees taking over Springfield, obviously in our case, the new murder hornets making headlines. In fact, a Simpsons writer is even admitting they must have predicted the future because this is wild, and we need to get to the bottom of this. Today on Life's Biggest Questions, we'll be asking, did the Simpsons really predict murder hornets? Welcome back to LBQ, guys. I'm your host with all the answers, Jared Bronstein, and today we're once again talking about the Simpsons predicting the future. Now, there may be logical reasons aside from coincidence or the writers being from the future, which will help us understand how the Simpsons predict things in general. Make sure to stick around to the end of this one for some comment replies, and let me know below which Simpsons episode is your favorite. For now, let's get right into it. In the past, the Simpsons have been eerily accurate on some of their predictions. Now, I'm not so sure you'd call it a prediction, maybe a coincidence, or maybe just sheer luck. That being said, somehow, the show has aired episodes in the past where things that happen end up actually happening in real life, and for some reason they usually happen decades after the initial airing date of said episode. A good example would be President Donald Trump actually becoming president, or the time The Simpsons predicted the Amazon wildfires. Of course, more recently there was the viral photo showing Springfield's news anchor Kent Brockman freaking out about a breaking story called coronavirus, with 3 other photos showing a cartoon version of a disease or virus attacking Homer, Principal Skinner, and some factory workers. But it turns out that was actually a photoshopped image, and the photo of Kent Brockman was from a completely different episode. Of course, there was also the video of Kent Brockman reporting the news from his home due to a quarantine. British TV writer Scott Bryan then tweeted a side-by-side comparison of a BBC correspondent reporting the news from his own home. However, the reasons for their quarantine are entirely different. For us, there's the pandemic. In The Simpsons, a curfew was put in place for anyone under the age of 70 after Springfield Elementary was vandalized by Homer and his drunk friends. And one of the show's writers, Bill Oakley, publicly came out against the idea that the writing team at The Simpsons predicted anything from the future. Speaking specifically on the pandemic prediction, Oakley told The Hollywood Reporter, I quote, "It was just supposed to be a quick joke about how the flu got here. It was meant to be absurd that someone could cough into a box and the virus would survive for 6 to 8 weeks in the box. It is cartoonish. We intentionally made it cartoonish because we wanted it to be silly and not scary, and not carry any of these bad associations along with it, which is why the virus itself was acting like a cartoon character and behaving in extremely unrealistic ways." End quote. And regarding other pandemics, he simply said it was history repeating itself. I quote him saying, "It's mainly just coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. Most of these episodes are based on things that happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that we knew about." End quote. And the episode he's referring to was aired in 1993. Episode 21, Season 4, titled Marged in Chains. We did an entire video about it, and I pretty much debunked how they didn't predict anything, and it was simply a mix of history repeating itself, coincidence, and the internet adding fuel to the fire by altering episodes to play into the narrative. But it seems now things have gotten much weirder. In this same episode, the people of Springfield can be seen asking the town's doctor for a cure to the illness, more specifically, the Osaka flu, which has taken over Springfield, and after a riot of people finally get Dr. Hibbert to come out onto his balcony to speak with the masses, he informs them there is no cure, telling the people, I quote, "The only cure is bed rest. Anything I give you will be a placebo." Immediately, a woman asks, "Where do we get these placebos?" Another man yells, "Maybe there's some in this truck." And before we go any further, let's talk about what's happened so far. The Simpsons predicted a flu from a factory in Asia and spread across a small town, infecting the majority of the population. It's gotten to the point that people are so desperate for a cure, they're not even being logical anymore. And thinking about our current pandemic, people are itching to end the lockdown and self-isolations. And some have gone as far as drinking or ingesting bleach in hopes it would help them. I mean, they're somewhat spot on. But again, as the show's writer explained, it was just history repeating itself. Again, growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of the writers spent most of their youth learning about the Asian flu, which took place from 1957 to 1958. So maybe that influenced them when making an episode where a virus from Asia takes over the town of Springfield. There's also been countless films, TV shows, comics, so many different types of art and media where a deadly disease or virus takes over. And as we know, viruses aren't necessarily curable, so the doctor telling the people of Springfield bed rest is the only real medicine, well, that's just basic science. But when the man says maybe there's some in this truck, and the group of people decide to shake the truck, eventually leading to a box falling out, well, I don't really know how to explain this one. If you've yet to see the viral video, the box in the truck that falls and breaks is labeled Danger, Killer Bees. Now, why is this important? Well, if you haven't heard, about a week ago an Asian hornet was spotted in Washington state. These hornets have been referred to in most headlines as murder hornets. That's because they're known to kill about 50 people a year on average in Japan alone, and are the size of your thumb. It's unclear how they got here, they come from Asia, but some experts believe they were deliberately released or transported to the US through international cargo and went unnoticed. I don't know which I'd prefer. Of course, considering how The Simpsons not only predicted the flu coming overseas and not having a cure, but in the same episode somehow predicted killer bees, well, I think it's obvious they did predict something here. And it seems one of the show's writers, Bill Oakley, is even admitting something here isn't adding up. Retweeting the clip, which currently has over 6 million views on Twitter, captioned it, "Okay, fine, I guess we did." Now, it seems Bill here is being sarcastic, obviously, and it seems there is always going to be a divide regarding The Simpsons predicting the future. Some believe they did, while others will cite history and just say it's sheer coincidence that some events that took place in the show decades ago are happening in the real world. If you really want to look at things from a logical standpoint, it seems this really is just a big coincidence, mixed with people wanting to believe The Simpsons predicted the future. A good example would be when Lisa had a smartwatch in 1995. The real smartwatch wouldn't be introduced to the world until 2013, but again, Lisa's smartwatch was an actual cell phone that folded into a watch. Yes, we have smartwatches, but the Jetsons also predicted we'd have flying cars and robot butlers. And if that does happen to be the case, say 100 years from now, maybe 1,000 years from now, the people living during those times will probably say the Jetsons predicted the future. At the end of the day, people get inspired creatively in many different ways. Clearly, some of the writers at The Simpsons were inspired by their personal past experiences and just general history in the world. Bringing it back to their latest prediction of the murder hornets, well, in the show they're considered killer bees. Still, very impressive for them to even come as close as they did. That being said, it does seem like one big coincidence, as the bees could have technically been anything. The point of the scene was to make fun of people for not listening to the medical professional, in this case Dr. Hibbert. After he tells them there's no cure, the group of people still look for one, completely disregarding the doctor after not liking the answer they heard. And that's where the bees come in, almost acting as an instant karma or instant regret for not listening simply because they didn't like the answer they heard. When the box of bees break, people start running all over trying to avoid being attacked. One guy goes as far as even grabbing one out of the air and swallowing it, still under the belief that this placebo may cure his illness. As you can see, the entire scene was made to poke fun at the ignorance of people during serious times. Much like a current pandemic, where healthcare professionals are encouraging people to stay home and practice social distancing, yet for some reason people are actually protesting that they still want to go back to work. Others think there's no virus at all. Now, I'm not here to discuss politics, but more so point out that The Simpsons based the scene not only on past historical events, but also how they assumed the majority of people would act under those circumstances. And it seems they were right about that too. So maybe The Simpsons really did predict the future. All joking aside, it seems there's always going to be claims that The Simpsons predicted the future. And I'm sure if people did their research and digging, we'd be able to find a ton of shows from the past that predicted the future. And that's because they're not predicting anything, but creating events based off of their personal past experiences or simply using their imagination, which again is influenced by things the writers have seen or heard in their own personal lives. So to wrap this one up, no, The Simpsons didn't predict the murder hornets, but they came pretty damn close to predicting our current scenario, which is an amazing coincidence in itself. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments down below.
The Simpsons did it! We've all heard this at some point. After 31 seasons and 679 episodes, they've covered a lot of topics from a lot of different angles. Hijinks galore, there are very few possible scenarios that this ever-changing team of writers hasn't explored. Sure, it's all fiction and speculation, but they've actually hit the nail on the head more than you might think. There's always the idea that if you put 1,000 monkeys in front of 1,000 typewriters, eventually you'll get a masterpiece. The monkeys may not know what they're doing, but eventually they'll hit the right keys in the right order, right? Well, let's not compare TV writers to monkeys here. They have at least some idea as to what they're doing. They're keen observers of the human condition. It shouldn't be too surprising when one of the ridiculous bits they come up with comes true. And the more ridiculous bits they fill their 21 weekly minutes with, the more likely they are to strike gold. It might not actually happen for a decade, but if the Simpsons can guess that a three-eyed fish might be found in a reservoir full of nuclear power plant water, you might think they have their finger on the pulse of something. Hello, fellow friends and philosophers, and welcome back to the most mind-bending channel on YouTube, Life's Biggest Questions. I'm your voice in the void, Keegan Hughes, and today we're asking a question that might make donuts taste a whole lot better. What if everything from The Simpsons came true? Before we get started, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more cromulent content. Perfect. Let's begin. So what if everything from The Simpsons came true? Well, I think the first major change we would notice is that we'd be living in Springfield, or Shelbyville, or any other location prominently featured on the show. Because if everything came true, we'd be living in that universe. We'd all be animated, goofy, yellowy, bug-eyed, same clothes every day wearing folks. Walking around, sawing the heads off statues, dropping rods of uranium without consequence, having a grand old time. It would be impossible to pack every single detail into one measly video, so if you want to know the real answer, go watch all 31 seasons in one sitting. It'll rewire your brain in such a way that the fictional world of The Simpsons becomes inseparable from reality. That's a fun stay-at-home exercise, eh? If you're not willing to commit to that life-changing practice, we'll take some examples and dissect them right here, right now. now. Nothing too crazy, mind you, but changing everything at once normalizes a lot of things that would otherwise be seen as pretty wild if they happened incrementally. So get ready for some cartoon rules. Speaking of cartoons, the stakes always seemed a little bit lower for things that are animated, eh? Grievous injuries become slapstick comedy, reckless behavior is encouraged for the sake of visual interest. If you're gonna animate something, it's gotta be visually interesting. No full scenes of over-the-shoulder conversations. That's not happening. The world of The Simpsons is more grounded than a lot of cartoons, especially considering that they allow people to get injured and die, but it happens a lot less often than in real life. If someone breaks a leg or gets into a car accident, the follow-up from those events doesn't involve months of recovery, then rehab, then adjusting to independent life once again. Instead, it's a montage of recovery tropes, or maybe the injury lasts for the entire episode. One thing's for sure though, no consequences can possibly last for more than 21 minutes. The Simpsons is not serialized, and therefore must wrap up each episode to be ready for the next. Plots are self-contained. Any large-scale change must be resolved in order to maintain order in the universe. So if this aspect of The Simpsons came true, we'd be living in a world with way fewer consequences. Starting on whatever day the cartoon came to life, nothing would change. Or at least, nothing would change quickly. Maybe over the course of many years, things would start to look a little different or sound a bit strange. Maybe some new people would show up and stick around, but only at the start of a new season. Otherwise, any new person or event could not possibly have an effect on the world that lasts more than the length of a standard episode of television. That's just how it goes. Meet a mysterious crooning saxophonist? Well, don't expect him to be around for too long. In about 10 minutes, something tragic will happen and remove him entirely from your life. Don't worry though, the mourning period can't extend past the end credits. Then it's on to the next story. I think once this was established, we'd see a big uptick of people taking crazy risks, acting out in ridiculous ways, and being outwardly cruel to their loved ones. Why? Because anything said or done won't matter a half hour from now. You can get away with pretty much anything in the Simpsons verse. Although every once in a while, ridiculous actions do have real consequences. Take Frank Grimes, for example. He's a realistic, grounded individual who sees Springfield for what it is: ridiculous. Why should Homer keep his job if he's lazy and incompetent? How is it possible that such a bumbling buffoon keeps a high-paying job at a nuclear power plant? This drives Frank crazy and eventually he acts out. Running amok at the power plant, Frank acts out all the irresponsible behaviors he sees on full display every day. Most of the power plant workers can get away with this thanks to divine intervention from their all-powerful creators, but Grimes has drawn attention to it and is punished. Had he just ignored the ludicrousness of it, he might have been spared. So I guess the lesson here is you can be as ridiculous as possible in a world where everything from The Simpsons comes true, just don't draw attention to it. If you play your cards right, you might a celebrity, fight a coworker, and eat a burrito the size of your head and face no ill effects for any of it. Nice. Speaking of food-related ill effects, we'd be eating a lot more if everything from The Simpsons came true. This classic American television show knows its country inside and out and has invented countless fictional food items to ensure the fast food obsession is well represented. From Krusty Burger to 1,200 tacos for $1,200 to the ubiquitous Duff beer, there's an insanely unhealthy meal for everyone. And boy would it show. Let's just say there aren't too many people in Springfield who remain extremely fit. These snacks and squishies are enough to make anyone gain a few pounds. And in terms of quality control, I think we're almost there. Some classic gags from The Simpsons include rubbing a fish fillet on the wall of a building to make it go clear, 3 types of beer coming from the same tube, and the ribwich being made of, well, something resembling meat. All this sounds suspiciously similar to real-life products and effects. Okay, maybe not the whole clear wall bit, but you could definitely make a piece of paper clear with any fried fish sandwich. So if everything from The Simpsons came true, we'd have even more ridiculous food items to choose from. And there's nothing out there I'd rather eat than a pink, sprinkled donut from Lard Lad. And these choices would embiggen our hearts. Probably not in the way that Jebediah Springfield intended. Yum yum. Tying the two examples we've discussed together, we'd probably also see more Homers out there getting too big to work and working from home. Technically, that's where we're at now. The Simpsons is so rich with content, there are thousands of things that would happen if everything were to come true. Babies would shoot billionaires. Plowmen would become famous. Television clowns would hire serial killer sidekicks. Houses would burn down and be passed off as Aurora Borealis. Average Joes would be sent into space with a handful of potato chips. People would be publicly crucified by the media due to a half-baked story. And you know what? I'm pretty sure most of this has already happened in our world. We are well on the way to everything from The Simpsons coming true already. Again, the writers just tend to make everything that's already happening and make it a little more absurd, so we shouldn't be too surprised. But it would be nice if these ridiculous situations came with a side order of tobacco and less real-world consequences. It's nice and funny when they're fiction, but seeing it all come to life is eerie and upsetting.
Over the years, especially within the last year or two, people all over the world have pointed to The Simpsons, more specifically their writers, for somehow predicting the future. More specifically, people cite episodes dating back to the 1990s in which situations the characters go through closely resemble things that have happened in our present day. As we know, over the years, people have claimed the Simpsons are responsible for predicting the future one way or another. Time and time again, year after year, there appears to be claims that they either predicted Trump's presidency or our current pandemic, murder hornets, the list goes on and on. And although some of these episodes have appeared to be incredibly accurate in predicting the future, the writers behind the episodes have made it clear they're not fortune tellers. But maybe that's just what they want us to think. On a more serious note, one of the show's writers, Bill Oakley, made it pretty clear that when they write the show, they tend to satirically write about things that have happened in the past, and because history repeats itself, it seems as if they're fortune tellers. Still, some people are sold on the idea that the writers know something us regular folks don't, and to no surprise, a lot of fans of the show and people just anxiously awaiting the results of our current election are currently looking through old Simpsons episodes to find out any clues or hints as to how things could potentially play out. I mean, after all, they did predict the faulty voting machines back in a 2008 episode, which came to fruition during the 2012 election, so weird.
Recently, The Simpsons premiered an episode with a whole lot to say about the upcoming election. They've never shied away from politics, so it makes sense that they're getting their 5 cents in before the votes are counted. Interestingly enough, it was part of their annual Halloween special known as the Treehouse of Horror. Feels like we're living in a horror world lately, doesn't it? Maybe that's just me. Also, it was just Halloween. Moving along, in this episode we see Homer hanging out in a voting booth mulling over his options. As he does so, Lisa pokes her head in and attempts to sway him away from voting for Donald Trump. The way she sees it, he is unfit to be re-elected, which depending on your point of view is pretty valid. Lisa's little reminder is followed by a scrolling list of 50 reasons that Donald Trump shouldn't be re-elected, ranging from putting children in cages, showing top secret documents at Mar-a-Lago, refusing to release his tax returns, pulling the US out of a climate agreement, appointing Betsy DeVos, calling third world countries holes, saying he grabbed someone by the leaking classified information, and more. There are 50 reasons folks at The Simpsons believe that Trump is unfit to be re-elected, and some more that they left off, saying that they didn't even include the worst one. Needless to say, they're attempting to sway the adult cartoon-watching populace away from another 4 years of Donald Trump. Could this be considered a prediction? Well, not really, but by coming out so strongly against the president incumbent, they're hoping to push more votes towards the Democrats. Will this strategy work? Well, it's not really likely that a last-minute list on a once popular television show will really change anyone's minds. People who didn't like Trump before they saw this episode probably still won't like Trump, and people who supported Trump prior to viewing this long list will probably see it as a bunch of cheap shots and not be swayed in any way. Maybe by saying that they haven't said the worst one, the writers are predicting that Trump will somehow one-up himself once again. Incredible to think about.
Now, when looking at some of Simpsons' past predictions, such as the faulty voting machines, and even one as specific as Team USA beating Sweden in curling at the Olympics, because really, who in a million years would even think about that? You realize sometimes they really are spot on. Coincidence? Or maybe they're from the future? It's possible that the answer is both, but there's also a very important factor when looking at a handful of these predictions. They never happened in the first place. For example, there was a photo of Donald Trump laying in a coffin from an apparent Simpsons episode in which everyone thought they predicted his death. Turns out that scene was never in an episode, and instead some fan art started going viral showing Trump in a coffin, which led people to believe the Simpsons somehow predicted he was going to die relatively soon. It's important to mention that picture went viral right around the time that he announced he had COVID. Their prediction of our current pandemic is also a little iffy, as yes, they made an episode in which a flu infects people all over Springfield, and hornets also wreak havoc, but the box holding the hornets in the episode definitely didn't say murder hornets, and the image of Kent Brockman, the Simpsons local news anchor, reading about the coronavirus from an episode back in 1993 was also altered. Originally it showed a dinosaur with a thermometer, which read Osaka flu. Someone covered that image to make it appear to be a story about cats, which was then interrupted about breaking news regarding coronavirus. What I'm getting at is, if you see any predictions regarding the election, fact check, because who knows if the Simpsons actually even made whatever you're sourcing.
Now, after all these years of making predictions, one has to wonder if the folks over at The Simpsons believe that they have some sort of higher power. It's a little far-fetched, but wouldn't you think that you had some hand in predicting the future if it happened so many times? Maybe you'd remain skeptical, but there would always be that thought at the back of your head, wondering if these predictions were possible. So if this is the case, maybe some of the folks over at The Simpsons have actually decided to try and force some predictions to come true. They're definitely self-aware at this point, with little nods to their predictive prowess in the past. So what if they do their best to manifest the kind of future they want? Kind of like witchcraft, but instead of using magic, they're using sitcom scripts. Not quite as interesting, but maybe just as effective. They haven't specifically done it yet, especially related to the 2020 election, but they could be cooking up some new content to force the future into the shape they desire. So, what do you think? Have they predicted this year's winner?
I think regardless of what happens, it's gonna just be a nightmare. So no.
No, yeah, no.
I mean,
we,
you could look
we
at-
haven't had any like U.S. like descending into total madness Simpson episodes yet, so they really didn't.
You could look at any Treehouse of Horror though, and it's like that is literally
Fair, yeah.
gonna be
Zombies are coming back.
something's gonna happen.
You know,
I don't know what, but something.
The shinning, people become psychic, and go
Something's gonna
crazy.
happen. I don't know. Just, in case you guys are confused, no, they did not predict the election. But again, who knows? Maybe somebody will go back to an episode from like 2006 and be like, oh, there was this one thing that kind of connects to this, which makes me think this happened. And then
True.
people are gonna be like, yeah, they predicted it.
Wow, yeah, I could see that. Absolutely.
That's like the Trump episode of him being president. It was literally just a clip of him from the year 2000 waving at people on an elevator.
It's a little goofy joke.
Yeah, and it was like from Trump Hotel or something like that. And then people just doctored it to make it look like it was presidency.
Yeah.
And then everyone believed it was true. So I'm gonna say what's gonna happen is after we find out the results, someone's gonna do that, and then it's gonna go viral, and everyone's gonna be like, how did we miss this?
There's somebody in their basement right now just
100%.
marathoning The Simpsons at 4 times speed, just like
100%.
hoping they find something.
There's somebody that literally just changed 2 episodes to be the results of either whichever one happens, and then they're just gonna start spreading out like crazy.
The Simpsons have accurately predicted a number of things, from Donald Trump being president to the plot twist ending in Game of Thrones to the NSA's spying scandal to even COVID-19. And now, the results of the 2020 election. It seems like they know what's gonna happen in the future. How do they do it? That's the question everyone wants to know. And I'll be discussing it today only on Life's Biggest Questions. Recently, fans have been recirculating a Simpsons short from 2012, claiming that it shows just how the election played out. The clip is from a Fox special called Mr. Burns Endorses Romney, and it was for the 2012 presidential election. It's only a minute and 50 seconds long, but in it, we see Mr. Burns in front of a map, showing the red and blue states for the election. What's freaky is that they look very similar to the 2020 Biden and Trump electoral map. I mean, at first glance, it looks identical, meaning The Simpsons somehow predicted the outcome of each state. But the only thing they got wrong was Arizona, which they had as red instead of blue. Still, how did they manage to pretty much get the exact election results? Keep in mind, the episode is 8 years old. But before I go any further, I'm just gonna ask you to hit that thumbs up button, spread the love, give us a like, it just really helps us out. So, previously The Simpsons seemed to have predicted Trump's presidency. Back in 2000, The Simpsons aired an episode titled Bart to the Future. Basically, in this episode, Bart gets a glimpse into the future to see what it's gonna be like for him and his family. In the episode, we see that Lisa Simpson is the president and is attempting to rebuild the economy after Donald Trump was president. In the episode, she says, "We inherited quite the budget crunch from President Trump." I repeat, she said, President Trump. Then when Trump became president, it shocked fans all over the world. But 2 writers for The Simpsons actually came forward to admit how they predicted this. One writer, Dan Greeny, told The Hollywood Reporter, and I quote, "It was a warning to America," and that just seemed like the logical last stop before hitting bottom. It was pitched because it was consistent with the vision of America going insane. He continued on saying, "What we needed was for Lisa to have problems beyond her fixing, that everything went as bad as it possibly could, and that's why we had Trump be president before her." But they didn't actually expect Trump to win. Another writer, Al Jean, said that they picked Trump because they were just looking for a celebrity that would be funny as the president. And during the time the episode was written, Trump was attempting to run as a Reform Party candidate, which you would never expect. So they ran with the idea of Trump being president. On top of that, Trump had already said back then that he would consider running for office at some point. So their prediction wasn't just based off of nothing. So now, how did they predict the outcome of the 2020 election? Some believe that The Simpsons writers are psychics or time travelers from the future, and they are creating these episodes to warn us of upcoming events. But in reality, they are just very knowledgeable people that do their research. I mean, if you look at the trend trends over the years during past elections, you can see which states tend to be those colors. States that are blue and states that are red are historically often going to be those colors. So all they had to do was look back at past elections. A lot of Twitter users pointed this out as well. One person tweeted, "You mean the Simpsons predicted that the states that usually vote blue would vote blue, and the states that usually vote red were projected to vote red? Let me act shocked." Another user tweeted, "I mean, it's pretty simple to predict sometimes which of them are liberal or conservative states. I don't blame the Simpsons for doing good research." So no, the Simpsons writers don't have any more insight into the future than we all have. Just a lot of research goes into each episode. Plus, they probably wanted to make the map as accurate as possible. It wouldn't make sense if the map was just way off. So in a way, they weren't even trying to make a prediction. They were just trying to be representative of the real world and the states. Al Jean also said in another interview, and I quote, "If you make enough predictions, then 10% will turn out to be right." So there you have it. The Simpsons episodes are filled with crazy things. Not everything is going to come true. Keep in mind they have over 600 episodes. Yeah, something they say or do is bound to come true. But if we actually look at it in a bigger picture, I would say that more Simpsons predictions have been wrong than right. It's just when something does turn out right, everyone hypes it out of proportion. Meanwhile, the writers just got lucky. At this time, we are analyzing the Simpsons episodes more and more. We are now purposely looking for things that have come true, and by doing so, we make it seem like they're psychics. But as you know from the writers, they look at trends, they see what's going on in the world and just kind of guess the outcome. If it turns out wrong, no one cares and everyone's like, oh yeah, well it's just a cartoon. But if it turns out right, everyone goes into a frenzy saying the Simpsons are psychic. For example, let's take a look at the murder hornets. Everyone was freaking out saying that the Simpsons predicted these insects. So in the 1993 episode titled Marge in Chains, the town gets sick from the flu sent from Japan. In the same episode, the town is rioting and end up knocking over a truck, which breaks open a crate labeled "Danger Killer Bees." People were then quickly to say that these killer bees are the murder hornets. That's just a coincidence. And the murder hornets aren't even deadly like the bees in the show. You can see how they take one thing and then try to apply it to real life events. In the end, we're the ones that are making all these predictions come true. Let's look at another example. It's thought that The Simpsons also predicted smartwatches. In a 1995 episode titled Lisa's Wedding, again, we jump forward to the future, and Lisa's fiance Hugh can be seen talking to his watch, which turns into a phone. Well, eventually Apple released the Apple Watch, which acts like a phone. You know, you could message people on it, you can make and receive phone calls on it. But are we all gonna forget about Inspector Gadget? In the 1983 show, we see Inspector Gadget using a smartwatch way before The Simpsons did it. And James Bond was also known to have a watch that had capabilities beyond telling time. Inspector Gadget also predicted FaceTime/video calls before The Simpsons did it in that same episode. So again, it's all subjective. We just freak ourselves out when we see it on The Simpsons. As much as we want to believe that The Simpsons hold some kind of power, they admitted themselves that they don't. Sometimes luck is on their side. Other times they research trends to see what's likely to come true, which they did in this case for the election map. Again, this map came true for this election, not the last election. Honestly, if it didn't come true this time around, maybe like 10 or so years from now, it would have. And like fans noticed, it's not that shocking that they colored the states the way that they were, because historically, that's the party they tend to vote for. So in the end, The Simpsons predicting the election results isn't that shocking. As they always say, history repeats itself. And The Simpsons made an educated guess based on it. I mean, it's not as fun as saying they are psychic, but it will do.